The White House East Room is literally being physically torn down. You know what a great distraction away from that is? This communist socialist guy who's gonna destroy New York City and enter a giant crime wave. That's a great way to distract from actual things that are happening literally right before our eyes in this country. Immigrants being rounded up. Once you have not committed any crimes, we can ignore all of that because we have this right-wing boogeyman. Welcome to Power Lines, presented this week by Beehive. I'm John Passantino.
And I am Oliver Darcy.
Today we're discussing Fox News hosts losing it over Zohran Mamdani. It never ends. A major media mogul is courting far-right podcasters, dangling awards for cash. Karoline Leavitt is melting down after texting with a reporter. You have to see it to believe it. But first, David Zaslav is in the fight of his life, attempting to hold off David Ellison, who just took over Paramount and now has his deep pockets set on Warner Brothers Discovery. Oliver, it's been another hell of a week in media. This week in particular, I think for a lot of people, maybe did not come as a surprise, but for people like myself, I still managed to be shocked. We woke up, I think it was Monday this week, to the news that Warner Brothers Discovery is putting a for sale sign up effectively on the major media conglomerate. This is the company that owns the HBO Max streaming service, HBO itself, the big cable portfolio, including CNN and TNT, and of course the big Warner Brothers studio in Burbank, which has put out all kinds of big hits. The biggest box office winner really of the year. It sort of saved the box office in a way in 2025. All these movies like Superman, Sinners, etc. But now suddenly the company that has only been formed, 3 years ago, as this brilliant way to take on Netflix in the 21st century, in the streaming era. The idea, of course, that it's got everything you would want under one roof. It's sort of being blown up now. And this whole grand vision is sort of just evaporating right before our eyes. Now what we're hearing is that David Ellison, who has effectively unlimited cash with his father, Larry Ellison, are ready to make a buy. They want to just effectively just take over Warner Brothers Discovery after just getting Paramount. This would, of course, be a gigantic deal for Hollywood and for the entire media landscape, putting these two big companies under effectively ownership of one man, more or less. What are you hearing about how this is going? It sounds like David Zaslav is effectively doing everything he can to prevent this sort of thing from happening. But what is he really after here?
Well, I think the first thing we should just step back and talk about how Zaslav putting a for sale sign on WBD is effectively a final acknowledgement from Zaslav that the justification for this big Warner Brothers Discovery service did not work. It failed, right? And it's the second time in Warner history, I think, over the past 10 years, where a company has acquired the big assets, right? Last time it was AT&T. They said they were going to do all the stuff with the media assets, and it was going to be great. That didn't work out. Their adventure in media failed. They sold off the assets. Then you have Warner Brothers Discovery that comes into play, and the idea is that the super streamer is going to be able to take on bigger streamers like Netflix and others. Didn't succeed, was never able to do that in a real way. And the stock has languished. Last year it was trading at Happy Meal prices at like $6 or something, $6-7 a share. And it had gone up a little bit, but it was still, only like, I think $10 to $12 a share over the past several months. And so trading really low until David Ellison comes along and it becomes known that he wants to buy it. Then the share prices pop and now they're over $20 a share. But anyway, long story short, the big experiment here that David Zaslav and John Malone sold everyone on did not work. And I think that's like the first thing we should point out. And I guess he kind of acknowledged it last year when he said that they were going to spin off the declining cable assets. But this is a big acknowledgement that they failed and they need to be sold now. And, you know, David Zaslav had for a long time portrayed Warner Brother Discovery as the big fish in the sea that was going to swallow maybe another fish like Fox or something else down the line. And now it's clear that he's the fish that is going to be swallowed. And that brings us to the second point, which is that Zaslav does not want to be swallowed by any other entity. And if you talk to people in the industry, and I think it's just clear just observing Zaslav in public and listening to how he talks, he very much likes being a studio boss. And he likes the trappings that come along with being a studio boss, whether that's sitting courtside at the Knicks games, whether it's sitting with Tom Cruise at the Olympics, whether that's talking about how he works behind Jack Warner's desk on the iconic Warner Brothers lot. He likes this stuff. And I think he likes being invited to the parties. He likes that movie stars return his calls and call him up. And what happens when he's bought off and he's sitting in his, you know, very nice, I hear, Oceanside Hamptons home, and it's just quiet. And I think that he probably can't, that's like the ultimate death sentence for a lot of media moguls who are no longer in the arena, and they're wealthy and they have everything you could ask for, but they're not relevant anymore to the scene that they've, you know, been a part of for so long. And I think that is a major factor here when you think about why Zaslav is trying to stave off this bid, this aggressive bid from David Ellison's Paramount to buy the whole company.
Yeah, it's a remarkable turn of events. Let's not forget that David Zaslav is effectively in this position because John Malone, the largest shareholder of Warner Brothers Discovery, who put him atop Discovery before the merger with the AT&T assets, Warner Media, and plopped him on top of it. He was put in that position. He has a long history of being like a cost-cutting manager, putting, you know, inexpensive content on Discovery Channel networks, reality-based stuff, doing stuff on the cheap, extracting profits. And in the 3 years that Warner Brothers Discovery has been in existence, we've seen the company's valuation just evaporate. The company has lost like 2/3 to 3/4 of its entire market value in this period. And it's only been in the last month, like you said, it's down to about $12 a share. Before that, I think it even got to like $8 to $9 a share from the 20s when the company was formed.
No, I think it's $6 a share at one point. It was the Happy Meal price. You could get a Happy Meal for cheaper than a Warner Brother Discovery share last year.
It's unbelievable. And so this vision clearly is like not worked out. And now it's a sort of tail between the legs moment when they announced, we're going to split these companies into two. We're going to keep the studio and we're going to keep the streaming service like HBO Max, which don't even get us into the fact that they've changed the name again. Again, basically indicating that our plan for Max did not work at all. And now they're openly saying we're open to an outsider coming in and basically buying us. Now, Zaslav seems to be in the position that what we would prefer to do here is possibly sell off our studio and streaming division to somebody, and they're already putting names out there, Netflix, Comcast, maybe Amazon, maybe Apple. We should talk about whether or not these are real. And then the cable networks could do their own thing separately. We're going to spin those off. And those spun off networks that include CNN and TBS and Cartoon Network, all that, they will find a second home. Maybe somebody else buys them like Versant, which NBC itself, Comcast, has spun off. But they seem to be floating this notion in public now that while David Ellison and Paramount are interested and they want to buy the whole thing, all the networks, all the studio division, all that, that actually Amazon and Netflix and Comcast are really interested too. And therefore there's a bidding war underway. And because there is a bidding war, this actually has a ton of value because the market really wants
no actual bids so far, except for one.
Well, that's the thing. It seems that there's not actually any bids from anyone other than directly from David Ellison, who we understand now has bid 3 different times, starting at around $19 to $20 a share, and now just shy of $24 a share. $24 a share, of course, is double what this company was trading at literally last month. So it's a pretty good premium. And the latest that we have heard is that David Ellison, with his latest overture, is offering the ability for Zaslav to come aboard as co-CEO or co-president. So he also would fall up into a much larger future Paramount WBD. But still, they're pushing back.
It seems too, with that offer, what they're trying to do there is they're trying to play to Zaslav's ego. Like, they understand that he does not want to be exiled to the Hamptons, and he wants to still be a player. So they're trying to play to his ego. But Zaslav's trying to get that bid up, I think, by, pretending or, hoping that there will be a bidding war. So far, again, there's only one bid that we know of, and that's from Paramount. But he's, I think it's fair to say, putting it out there in the press that there's all this interest from other, he actually said it on the record, in his press release, saying there's all this interest from other people and we're going to look at the stuff. But if you go down the list, it's hard to imagine that Apple is interested in the whole portfolio or, the stuff. Eddie Q told Matt Bellany on his podcast that, basically we're never going to rule anything out entirely, but we're not interested. Can't imagine Comcast is going to get any transaction approved, given that Donald Trump loathes Brian Roberts. So the M&A climate over at Comcast, it seems like they're pretty clearly on ice. So don't really see a world in which that happens, even if Comcast were interested in some of those assets. Maybe Netflix, but Netflix is also, no one ever rules anything out, but they've also indicated they're probably not interested in this asset. So that leaves Amazon, I guess. Maybe there's something there, but do they want the studio and streamer? And then even if they do, you have to consider too that the Warner Brother Discovery board has to then still reject a largely all cash offer, right? A majority cash offer, 80% cash offer for their assets in favor of the idea, taking the chance that splitting this company into two and selling some of the assets to a player will unlock more value than just selling them all at once to the guy with cash in hand ready to pay for the whole thing. And that seems like a really hard argument to make. It seems like actually what's really happening at this point is they're trying to gin up a bidding war to get the price up a little bit so they get a higher premium from David Ellison. But I don't know. Anything can happen, but it's hard to imagine that in a year from now, David Ellison doesn't have his hands on that portfolio.
Yeah, I have a hard time believing that Netflix seriously wants to buy this. They've been averse to doing anything like that in the past. And we heard Ted Sarandos say again on their earnings call this week that they're not into buying into the legacy media business. The whole reason why I think they're successful in large part is because they have always not had the baggage associated with any of that. It's a lot easier to start fresh and start new and carry out a vision than to try to incorporate this, which leads me to Amazon, which in the past bought MGM Studios. That was a much more difficult integration than I think they had realized. I don't know that that's really been as captivating as maybe they would have hoped at bringing people to the Amazon Prime streaming service platform, which I think people are getting a bunch of different things out of, including you can just rent movies from every platform. It's sort of become like a marketplace for all the other streamers that are all integrated into Prime.
Also, their business model for Prime is to get you buying things on Amazon.com. And this is just an added sweetener, you get also this little video service, right? But I think most people have Amazon Prime because they have Amazon.
I also just can't imagine that Jeff Bezos right now in this moment wants to do a big transaction right in front of Donald Trump. That's going to include, either taking CNN or taking all of these other assets that are going to put him and expose him right in front of the Trump administration if he doesn't have to. He's playing nice, all that, but to me, it just seems like it makes a lot of sense for him to get deeper into the media business. We'll see if we're wrong. And then that leaves what? Comcast. And Brian Roberts, who runs Comcast, is just spun off all of his media assets from the cable division and basically distanced himself from it. It's hard for me to imagine that he wants to look, but realistically, if you took Donald Trump out of the picture, you can see how Warner Brothers as a studio and Max as a streaming service actually would be very compelling to them. Peacock is currently one of the smallest of the streaming platforms, and it does not have a great library. It's not that deep. It has sports rights now acquired from none other than David Zaslav and Warner Brothers Discovery, but they could gain something there. I just don't know if they're going to want to spend the money. And to me, it feels like, and we wrote about this week in Status, that maybe he wants to play spoiler here and just feign having interest to ratchet up the price for his rival, David Ellison, who 10 minutes ago wasn't even on the scene and now suddenly is a force to be reckoned with because, his father's money is able to buy him a vast amount of, of what is a dying industry in many ways at this moment on life support in Hollywood, where you can buy these assets that are still expensive, but much cheaper than in years past. So I don't see how any of these, let's say, these interested suitors are really going to pull the trigger with a significant deal, which gets us back to one man, David Ellison. And so I also suspect that while they're trying to play the field here publicly, that we're going to just end back up with David Ellison is offering majority cash. He's offering, as of now, something like $24 a share, as you reported this week. That's a pretty good number, but what is going to force the needle here? What is going to...
Yeah. I think it's somewhat, it's to some extent, I think of this as like the man who lives down the block in the house that you drive by all the time, this big mansion, has put a big for sale sign out on the front lawn and is saying, come in and check out the house. Come into the open house, right? Everyone's going to go to the open house. They're going to look at the rooms. You're always kind of curious, like what's it like inside there, right? So everyone's going to go check it out, walk through it, see the pool or whatever's on the property. But are they actually going to make a bid for it and offer for it? And is it going to be like as enticing as the 80% cash offer on the table already? Maybe you don't want to sell it to that guy and you can get a little more out of him by showing that people are coming to check out the open house. But at the end of the day, I think he's the guy that's a serious buyer. And it's going to be difficult to I think for the board, which has a fiduciary responsibility to its shareholders, to reject this offer and sell everyone on this idea that splitting up the company and proceeding with the split is going to unlock more value years down the line, probably, or selling part of the company is going to be better for them down the line when, if you're an investor in WBD and your share price was at $12 and now it's, there's someone offering 24 and it's going to basically bail you out from this whole mess of the last 3 years, seems pretty enticing to me. But I do think we should talk about the editorial implications here for CNN, which has, like Warner, changed hands twice over the past 10 years, or 3 times, depending on how you count, going from Time Warner to AT&T to WBD, and now maybe David Ellison. It's a lot of corporate changes. That's a lot of reorgs. That's a lot of getting acquainted with new bosses. But most importantly, that's a lot of different editorial priorities. And we've already seen David Zaslav and Warner Brothers Discovery, soften the coverage on Donald Trump considerably, which has led to, at least in part, to a rating slide over there. And the question is, does David Ellison continue pushing that direction? Is he even worse for CNN, perhaps from an editorial perspective, than David Zaslav? Are the CNNers going to be begging for David Zaslav and Chris Licht when they have David Ellison and Barry Weiss at the helm?
Jeez. Yeah. I mean, I imagine if you're at CNN right now, and you and I used to work there, so full disclosure, I imagine that you are looking at this very nervously. I think that you're watching what's going on at CBS, which is a long-established news organization that is not one that's seen as partisan in any way and has gone through a lot recently. And suddenly now, and we've had significant number of people who have resigned from their position because of pressures from atop the company during the merger period. We saw that at 60 Minutes. We saw that at the head of CBS with Wendy McMahon. And then we see the entrance of Barry Weiss, who owned a Substack, an opinion-based website, now as the editor-in-chief, there's only one reason why you do that, right? And that is to change the political lens of the network, to add a different editorial flavor, obviously pulling it to the right. The only reason why anybody even reads the Free Press or talks about Bari Weiss is because of what she built is specifically an anti-woke, contrarian, conservative light outlet that from time to time offers light criticism of Republicans, but is more or less like in line with the right-wing, political parties of 2025. And the fact that Ellison felt no problem, let's put her in charge, despite her not ever running a major news organization, or let alone a television one, I think should be alarming for people at CNN right now who may have a future underneath her, where you could see, if you're Ellison, CBS News is a broadcast, enterprise as a newsroom. And then you have your cable outlet, your 24/7 news operation with CNN. You could easily combine those and put a new editor-in-chief in charge. What would happen to Mark Thompson in that? I have no idea. He's, all of these executives are under various forms of contracts. Those eventually end. But I do think that there's probably some unease in that newsroom looking at the situation, because once again, like you said, this means that you're going to go through the ringer of a corporate transaction and new questions of what does the new ownership want more or less of. And
yeah, I think there's two things too there. One, we already know that CBS News is going to be hit by layoffs next week. So they're already going to get cut because David Ellison's in charge. But if they buy CNN, that's going to result in more synergy, as the executives like to say, which is a translation for we can cut more jobs. And so if you have CBS and CNN, maybe you don't need the CBS news gathering arm anymore. Maybe you say we're going to use CNN correspondents on CBS News. So we can say bye-bye to a lot of CBS News correspondents and the general news gathering infrastructure that they've built up. Maybe you have Anderson Cooper anchoring the evening news in some world, right? And you don't need to have a separate program and staff for that show. Maybe it's just as the CNN staff. And so there will be, if this does happen, there will be cuts on both sides of these companies, because there will be just synergy that you can find to save costs or to save money. And then it's the editorial stuff, right? And if Bari Weiss and company and David Ellison thinks that CBS News, like you said, which is a very down the middle news organization, very, I don't really think it has a perception outside Donald Trump hating 60 Minutes of being, biased. They're really, CNN is going to be a different story. And I think that, if again, like they're going to move it in a direction that's in pro-Trump waters, I think, or at least much friendlier waters to Donald Trump. And that's the reason that he wants this deal, or he has basically approved the deal in public already, right? He's lavishing praise on the Ellisons for a reason. It's not because he thinks that David Ellison is a brilliant Hollywood mogul who's going to make some really good movies. It's because he knows what he's doing with these news organizations, which are always on his mind. He is the one who's at 2 a.m. raging against fake news CNN and filing lawsuits against 60 Minutes and the New York Times and the Washington Post, or not the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal. Donald Trump is obsessed with these news organizations. And so when he says things positively about the Ellisons, that is very much what he's likely referring to, not the strategy for the streamer. He doesn't care. I don't think Donald Trump is a big Paramount Plus viewer. He's not watching Landman and 1923, right? He's watching CBS News. That's what he cares about.
So you bet that, if you had to bet right now, do you think Ellison ends up getting Warner Brothers Discovery? Or do you think there's somebody else waiting in the wings? There's like Comcast is going to pull it off. My bet in this moment is that it's going to be Ellison. He has the offer already on the table. It's real money. It buys the entire thing, including the cable channels. Even if Zaslav doesn't want it in the moment, or he's saying that out loud to inflate the price another $1 or $2, let's say, I think that there's just, my view is there's no other way around this. This is what's going to happen. What do you think?
I think you're right. I mean, I have a hard time seeing a scenario where this deal does not happen. I think a lot of this stuff that we're seeing in the press right now is negotiations between both sides saying, this is my highest offer where it's going to be, or we won't take it unless it's over $27 or whatever a share. I think that it's going to happen. I can't imagine a scenario where Comcast wants to make a bid, and even if they do make a bid and they win, can't imagine a scenario where this Trump administration just allows it to sail through, and that will weigh on the board as they consider their options. And so if you're going to sell it, why not sell it to the guy, from a business perspective, who has cash in hand and who's going to be, not throwing up any regulatory red flags. And also there's no FCC approval here. So short of the DOJ suing to stop the deal, this thing should happen pretty quickly once they come up with the terms.
That's right. Tough times for Brendan Carr on this one. All right. Well, when we come back, we're going to talk about Karoline Leavitt melting down after texting with a reporter, and Jay Penske, the owner of a Hollywood media empire, courting far-right podcasters for his Golden Globes.
Let me take a quick minute to tell you about the platform we use to run Status. It's called Beehive, and I've got a special offer for readers coming up. But first, here's a little background on why Beehive was right for Status. When I started this newsletter, I needed a platform that could grow with us. Something powerful enough for serious publishers, but simple enough to build without a large team of engineers or designers.
That's exactly what we found with Beehive. It was built by the same team behind Morning Brew, so they understand what it takes to grow an audience and build a real business around your work. Since launching, two things have made a huge difference. First, our newsletter actually reaches people because the deliverability is outstanding. We don't really have to worry about spam filters anymore. Second, the paid subscription setup is incredibly easy. This is where you can charge for access to your newsletter. Beehive handles payments, subscriber management, all of it. That lets us stay focused on the journalism while the platform turns our work into a sustainable business.
Whether you're an independent writer or running a larger publication, Beehive gives you everything in one place. A clean editor, a website for your publication, powerful growth tools like referrals and recommendations, and multiple ways to make money from day one. If you're thinking about starting a newsletter or switching platforms, Beehive is offering Status readers 30% off your first 3 months with code STATUS30.
Visit beehive.com/status. That's BEEHIIV.com/status and start building your newsletter today. All right, we're back. So Oliver, this week, we had this pretty unusual situation where Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt went on X and out of nowhere posted this screenshot of a text message conversation that she had with a reporter. This is the Huffington Post White House reporter, SV Date. She posted this screenshot in what looked like an attempt to just dunk on the reporter, mainstream press, whatever. The screenshot shows her texting with the reporter. The reporter had asked ahead of what was possibly going to be this meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin in Budapest, which, as we now know, is not happening. They've walked that entirely back. That aside, he had asked, is the president aware of the significance of Budapest, that Russia had promised to invade Ukraine? Legitimate questions about why is this meeting being held on this ground. She writes back, your mom did. And it's supposed to be apparently funny. So he writes back, is this funny to you? And then she writes, it's funny to me that you actually consider yourself a journal. You are a far left hack who nobody takes seriously, including your colleagues, blah, blah, blah. I think that she was supposed to come across here as strong, as, fending off the liberal media, the fake news that Trump, so vigorously loves to hate. But I looked at this, and I think that if they were intending for this to be a dunk, this was a big miss. This looked to me like a very legitimate question asked by a reporter as to why the president is going to meet with the Russian, authoritarian leader in Budapest, and this looks just like a legitimate question that instead she's turned around and made herself, it's really sort of embarrassing for her to do.
It's very embarrassing. And a couple of things on this. one, if you look at the question, it was very professionally asked. It wasn't asked in an antagonistic way. It was like, I'm writing a story. We're reaching out for comments. Here's my question. Was anyone aware of the significance of Budapest or who picked it or whatever it was? And she says, your mom did? Like, is she a 5-year-old? Like, even 5-year-olds are more mature than that. If my 5-year-old said that, I don't have a 5-year-old, but if I did, and they said that, I would say, hey, that's not how you talk to people. And so I guess the White House press secretary has fallen below that bar, which is shameful, really. And then the second thing is, these are the people who complain if they don't get press inquiries, right? You never reached out for a comment. You ran this story without even bothering to check with us, blah, blah, blah. And then she says in this text message chain, not only does she insult the reporter, so it's like, what's the point of even reaching out to you when you're not even, responding in a serious way? She could have just said, we have no comment, but she responded in this childish way. But anyway, she says to the reporter, do not contact me, basically. Stop texting me. And it's like, okay, so Karoline, do you want reporters to reach out to you for comment? Or do you not? You can't have it both ways. You can't dunk on reporters for not reaching out for comment and then dunk on reporters and tell them, don't reach out to me. It's one or the other. And reporters have to reach out for comment. So, they're going to continue to do that. And by the way, Karoline, it's your job to respond to requests for comment. And, the shocking thing too about this story, John, is that it's not like SV Date posted this himself. Like, look at what Caroline Leavitt's telling me, or Leavitt. She posted it as a brag.
This stuff is all shocking, but it is the implication, the downstream of how Donald Trump continues to attack the press and to try to single them out. We've seen all these administration departments go after reporters repeatedly on that platform to try to put a spotlight on them, to criticize their work. And all of this is being done to undermine their credibility so that when reporters put anything out there, when news organizations report information about what's really going on behind the scenes here, they can portray it as liars and to not trust it. You can only trust us. You can only believe us. And I think that's what we're seeing here. And we're seeing all these agencies, including also now at the Department of Defense, which is run by Pete Hegseth. Hegseth this week rolled out his new, I don't even know what you call it, far-right influencer propagandist mouthpiece replacement for the press corps that has long been at the Pentagon. So last week, all of the Pentagon correspondents left the building after refusing to sign this document that basically was a pledge that they would only produce and report information that the government had pre-approved, even unclassified information. You couldn't go on social media and even just suggest that you were interested in reporting on what's going on at the Pentagon and communicate with others, which is what reporters do every day. They were effectively banned from that and actually set them up for a potential legal fight that if they were to violate, that they could actually lose their First Amendment rights to report, which again, this is such an unprecedented moment. So those reporters are all gone. And now they've been replaced by far-right podcasters who are not journalists like Tim Pool and others in this space. And what we're seeing here is a blatant and obvious attack on the press, on information and truth, and replacing it with people who will just say whatever the administration does is great. And we're watching it happen right before our eyes.
Yeah, I think that's the alarming thing is we often focus on the attacks, I guess, on the reporters. But simultaneously, this White House, this administration is doing everything they can to prop up the disinformation artists who will advance corrosive conspiracy theories with the aim of promoting Trump and promoting his administration. And so at the Pentagon, for instance, it's not that these people are only far right and they have this ideology, but look at who they put in, like the Gateway pundit, Jack Posobiec. These are conspiracy theorists. These are people who have advanced lies about things like the 2020 election. Jack Posobiec was involved in the Pizzagate scandal, which resulted in actual, violence, I guess, or like shots fired at the pizza place in Washington, D.C., the Comet Pizza. I can't pronounce that other word. And so, like, it's a serious thing. These are the people that the administration is telling the public to believe, to go to for your information. And simultaneously, they're bashing and they're doing everything they can to delegitimize actual reporters who are engaging in a very, I think, with at least in that text message, SV was engaging in a very thoughtful, courteous way with the White House press secretary. Can you imagine if Sean Spicer, by the way, had come out on day one of Trump 1.0 and there was a question and he responded, "Your mom"? Like, I think at that moment, like where he obviously was not truthful and talking about the crowd size, but that was like a major moment at the time. And we've come so far along that now the White House press secretary putting this kind of behavior on display is barely a blip. It's just like expected. And that's how, I mean, Sean Spicer actually looks somewhat like a professional compared to Karoline Leavitt, who just looks like a, I don't know, partisan
It's so
hack.
true. It's so true. All they want to do now is own the libs. You don't have to answer to anything. Just attack, own the libs. It is wild times. All right. So moving on though. Also this week, we had some news in status that you broke. We have the Golden Globes that are coming up this year. It's one of the more prestigious Hollywood awards. Generally, it's reserved for film and television projects. You see A-listers come out. But this year, the Golden Globes, which is now owned by Jay Penske, who owns a Hollywood trade empire like Variety and Hollywood Reporter, they announced that we're going to be doing a Best Podcast Award, which raised a lot of eyebrows initially, but even more so when they announced the slate of 25 podcasters that are available or eligible who've been nominated for this great honor that will put them up on stage with, legitimate Hollywood.
At least on the red carpet.
Well, exactly. So the names that have come out include Joe Rogan, Megyn Kelly, Theo Vaughn, Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens, and a slate of others. This is a bit surprising to everybody, of course. But what you learned, Oliver, this week is that Penske's Variety, which is a very important and well-known Hollywood reporting trade, is offering these expensive packages for these podcasters to get their message in front of the Golden Globes voters, which again, the same company owns the Golden Globes, and also offers them a curious award. They're calling it the Variety Creative Impact Award, which they will present on stage, and they will give you a 15-minute Variety moderated conversation, of course, of which may or may not be in front of Golden Globes voters who will select you to be the best podcast of the year. This feels like there's some obvious ethical issues at play here. What do you think about all this?
Yeah, I mean, a magazine selling an award to people who dump toxic waste into the public discourse on a daily basis, like selling it for $75,000, seems like a pretty big ethical issue at the very least, right? Like, for $75,000, Candace Owens can pay to have Variety, which is, like you said, a prestigious publication, honor her with a Creative Impact Award, whatever that is, on stage. And then not only do they get that, but they also then get the conversation written about in Variety. They get a bunch of social media posts across Variety's social media channels on Instagram and Facebook and elsewhere. And typically, can you imagine if like any other news organization were offering to sell awards like this? Now, to be clear, like what's happening here is Jay Penske owns this massive portfolio of events and news media companies. And so he owns the Golden Globes and he owns all these Hollywood publications. And typically with the way this works is during award season, film and television studios can buy what you call FYC ads on his websites. And they can also participate in FYC events where Jay Penske gathers the Golden Globes voters who would decide who wins the award. And you can basically pay to have your producer or director go on stage and talk to that audience for a conversation so that they might vote for your project. And there have already been questions about the ethics of that, given that Jay Penske not only owns the trades, but now he owns the award show as of 2023. And that's certainly ethical, dubious waters to be in. But when you add in the fact that now he is pitching these far-right podcasters who have a history of promoting, conspiracy theories and lies and disinformation to their audiences and saying, we will basically sanitize you to some extent, legitimize you in front of this audience, is really striking. And I think there's another layer to this, John, which is that people like Ben Shapiro have been attacking these cultural institutions that the Golden Globes aims to celebrate. So if you think about what Ben Shapiro was saying about Disney, for instance, only a couple years ago, they were, I don't know, they were certainly not big Disney fans. It sounded like, I think they were calling for a Disney boycott and saying that we needed to build our own children's programming empire to combat those evil people at Disney who are trying to brainwash your children. And, so I think it's really striking that he could be on the Golden Globes carpet next to Bob Iger and next to these Disney actors and celebrities. And Jay Penske is welcoming that. He's saying, come on in. And he's saying, pay me some money and I'll even legitimize you against this audience. And by the way, it's unlikely that during these events, these 15-minute conversations that they have that you pay to access, there's going to be really hard questions, right? We saw last year, actually, for the first time, I believe, the Daily Wire paid for one of these FYC events with Deadline, which is another Jay Penske-owned trade publication. And they did this interview with Matt Walsh, who's the far-right conspiracy theorist and extremist, frankly, and over his documentary, Am I a Racist? Because they were trying to get awards for this documentary. And that was a very softball conversation, and I had a very nice glowing write-up on Deadline.com. And I think that's kind of what, they're doing here. Pay us, and we'll give you nice glowing coverage no matter how reprehensible you are.
Incredible. All right. Well, we'll see how this will go. The Golden Globes not on just yet, so we've got plenty of time to see the reaction to this. It's a great scoop, Oliver. That was a really good one this week. All right. When we come back, Fox hosts and right-wing media are losing it over Zohran Mamdani as we approach the New York City mayoral election.
John, changing seasons means harsher air, drier skin, and the after effects of travel and summer sun damage catching up to you.
It's true. Your skin has different needs this time of year, and that's where OneSkin comes in.
If you haven't heard of OneSkin, they're the first skin longevity company, founded by an all-woman team of PhDs in skin regeneration, tissue engineering, and stem cell biology, and their products are backed by 5 published clinical studies and over 10,000 5-star reviews.
Wow. Oliver, have you tried some of their products?
Yeah, I've been using their face lotion and their eye cream for the last several weeks now, and I think the audience thinks that it must be working because, again, we continue to be described as AI. But John, you're the one staring at me in the camera. What do you think?
Your skin does have a nice glow to it.
It does?
I've always teased about how you have this smooth skin, like you're wrinkle-free, while I over here wither away. So what's also great is that every formula is dermatologist tested, it's safe for sensitive skin, and it's NEA approved, delivering powerful results with skin health in mind.
This season, don't just moisturize, support your skin at the cellular level with OneSkin. For a limited time, you can try OneSkin with 15% off using code STATUS at oneskin.co. That's 15% off oneskin.co with code STATUS. After you purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. Try OneSkin today.
Welcome back. So, Oliver, this week we had the New York City mayoral debate in which Zohran Mamdani faced off with his other rivals, Andrew Cuomo and Sliwa, the Republican who amazingly is still in this race. Fox News, though, continues to just absolutely melt down over him, over Zohran, that is.
New warnings about Democrat socialist Zohran Mamdani and how he could usher in the demise of America's financial capital.
Critics call it imperative to protect New York City from Zohran Mamdani's extreme and dangerous agenda.
Zohran Mamdani refused to call on Hamas, a terror organization, to disarm. Apparently that's fine.
Zohran Mamdani in particular is dominating with foreign-born voters. Is that concerning?
I think that it's a little naive to not be alarmed by this.
Chances are very high that they will now elect an actual communist to run America's biggest city, and not just any communist, Zohran Mamdani.
Look, I feel like this is just part of the playbook we've seen over and over again at Fox and across far-right media, which is that, these are the latest boogeymen as red meat for your base. It excites them to see these characters or these political figures and to go after them. What do you make of this? And do you think that this hysteria just blows over?
No, I don't think so. I think he's the top boogeyman in right-wing media right now, and it's going to continue because it's clearly generating a response from their audiences. And so they're going to continue feeding them what they want to hear. And I think it's not unlike anything we've seen before. Ilhan Omar and the Squad and AOC come to mind, where Fox News and the right-wing media sphere portrays them in the harshest light, makes it seem very much otherizes them, makes it seem like they're cozy, maybe with like Islamists who hate America, and they've got the secret agenda, and we can't really trust these people. They don't like Western civilization. They could lead to the downfall of capitalism, all this stuff. It's the normal playbook, and they're running it on Zohran. What I do think is interesting, though, John, is that Zohran has been able to communicate directly to voters for the past year or so on social media. And that version of him is just so much different than the version that's villainized on Fox News on a daily basis. And even when he went on Fox News, I think it was one of those rare moments where that audience saw a very different person than they're used to seeing, because he was smiling, he was able to answer Martha McCallum's questions, he was engaging on policy in a thoughtful way, and typically, Fox News does not portray him in that light.
Yeah, I think that they've been whipping up every possible fear and concern about what a Mamdani administration would look like. They've run numerous segments about how businesses are going to flee New York. They're talking endlessly about how dangerous he would be for crime in the city. I mean, they're really just clearly showing what they think about him. And this is just across the network's coverage. Will Cain just openly saying he represents a threat to Western civilization. I mean, they're not even trying to be subtle here.
They're so worried about New York City. I thought they don't even like New York. Do these people live in New York? I thought it's uninhabitable.
It's a very good point. Although I think for some people like Sean Hannity, doesn't he just do his show from his house in Florida now? And Laura Ingraham is not even going there anymore either. It's like they're talking about this and they have just no connection to it anymore, but they're just so worried about New York. But this feels like it's part of their standard playbook, and we're going to continue to see more of this. And I do think for that channel right now, which is facing controversy after controversy, scandal after scandal, the White House East Room is literally being physically torn down with these visceral images. You know what a great distraction away from that is? This communist socialist guy and who's going to destroy New York City and enter a giant crime wave that will wipe out the city and send businesses fleeing and Americans harmed. That's a great way to distract from actual things that are happening literally right before our eyes in this country. Immigrants being rounded up. Once you have not committed any crimes other than to enter this country, we can ignore all of that because we have this right-wing boogeyman that we can continue to talk about and to keep the audience excited and freaked out about. But I do think they're also worried at Fox, and maybe those largely across in the sort of right-wing leadership space, that Zohran Mamdani represents actually a new wave of politics on the left. And I think that they're worried about his direct to people message and his ability to sort of just wade through this stuff. He went directly onto Fox. We talked about that before and did an interview there. And he very successfully combated their questions and then turn to camera and talk directly to Donald Trump. And I think that was a very smart use of the media. And I do think that there are some fears that he represents a new way for politicians on the left to speak to people. And they're doing everything they can really to try to, to ruin his reputation in the meantime.
Yeah, it's so interesting how the free buses apparently show a disrespect for American culture and Western civilization, but tearing down the entire east wing of the White House. That's there to look at.
Yeah.
Like,
exactly.
Zohran better not change any of the carpeting or anything inside the New York City mayor's mansion, because that is going to be a big scandal.
So also this week, we had some incredible new data that came out from this third party called Antenna Group that really measured for the first time how significant the backlash was to Disney after they pulled Jimmy Kimmel off the air last month. Everyone was shocked by it. As you know, a few days later, they ended the suspension. They put him back on the air. But we had seen a number of people on social media in an impossible to measure amount saying, I'm canceling Disney Plus. I'm canceling all my subscriptions to Disney. I cannot believe this. This is a free speech issue. They're clearly doing this to bow down to the Trump administration's threats from Brendan Carr. Well, now we know, according to data this week from the Antenna Group, they found that 4 million people roughly canceled their Hulu subscriptions in the month of September, and another 3 million canceled Disney Plus. Combined, that's about 7 million cancellations. That is up way and above their normal average of what you call churn. That's the number of people who basically cancel every month, and maybe they'll come back later. Who knows? That is a massive wave of people reacting. And I do think now, for the first time seeing this, that maybe this public backlash actually did affect the decision from Disney brass, that's Bob Iger and Dana Walden, to restore Jimmy Kimmel to the air. What do you think?
I think it was a bunch of things. I think it was the just public shaming and the controversy and the PR nightmare that they're dealing with. I think they also probably recognized pretty quickly, like even from day one, it sounded like, that night, like they didn't know what to do and pulled him off the air, but wanted him back on the air sooner than later. And so I think there was a lot, but certainly I'm sure as watching these cancellations, that must have really at least moved them in that direction, right? And I think it's notable again, and this is another data point that shows that it's actually bad for business when news companies or media companies bow down to Trump. When they acquiesce to power, their actual customers rebel against them. And it's bad for business. That happens whether it's the Washington Post with Jeff Bezos meddling in that newspaper's editorial pages. It happened at the Los Angeles Times with Patrick Soon-Shiong doing the same thing. I think it's happened at CNN again, where the coverage has softened and viewers have left in droves. And it happened at Disney when they made this move to cancel Kimmel. People canceled their subscriptions and said, "No, thank you, we're gone."
Yeah, the data has shown over time that Netflix, which has, the largest streaming audience just by comparison, usually has around a 2% churn rate. That means roughly 2% of their customers cancel their subscription for whatever reason. By comparison, last month, Disney Plus was at 8% and Hulu was at 10%. Imagine 1 in 10 of your customers is canceling. That's a disaster. Imagine Coca-Cola overnight loses 10% of all of their product sales. I do think exactly what you're saying here, that bowing down, getting on a knee, whatever you want to call it, for the Trump administration, which is really what happened here. It was the same day that Brendan Carr, who runs the FCC, put out this very clear threat to Disney that they might have to take a look at their licenses if Jimmy Kimmel remained on the air. That there are real repercussions for this. And we are seeing that there is a lot of power in the consumer in this era, that people who are seeing what is happening right before their eyes and they don't agree with what they're seeing, they're taking their dollars elsewhere. Now for, you or me, that might be $10 a month, or I had a $2.99 a month Disney Plus plan from, what was it? From last Black Friday. But in aggregate, there was a lot of power, and clearly millions of people decided to act here Kimmel, of course, has been back on the air since, and his ratings have been, I think, higher, at least higher than in recent years. And I believe he was number one for 3 weeks after that, which took the crown from Stephen Colbert, who, as we know, is also being canceled. So what an absolute wild time. Where do you think we go from here on this stuff?
Well, I mean, I think it should be a very, big sign to media owners not to betray their audiences and not to betray their talent in the face of being bullied by a man in the White House who has very thin skin. And I think that there is certain people out there who say, this is the business. Like these are business moves. You have to understand the business of this whole thing. The business is the editorial and what these institutions stand for in the eyes of consumers. And so if you are the Washington Post and your slogan is democracy dies in darkness, and you have stood for that or branded yourself as that outlet, then going back on your word is going to trigger backlash amongst your subscribers. And I think that's happened again across the board. And so this Disney data point is another example that shows that this is bad for business when you compromise on the editorial. You can't do that. You can't, at least if you care about the actual business. And so these things go hand in hand. It's ethically the right thing to do not to bow down to power, but it's also the right business move as well. And I think that that media bosses should take that to heart.
Yeah, quite a lesson here. All right, well, Oliver, it's been another great week. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll catch you next week. Thank you for listening to Power Lines, a presentation of Status, and a special thank you to Beehive for sponsoring this episode. The show is produced by Matt Havia and Antonio Enriquez in association with In the Arena Studios. Please like, share, and subscribe to Power Lines on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen, and watch full episodes and clips on our YouTube page at Status.